Hey gang, welcome to another edition of Strange the World. My name is Kevin Strange. I am your host. Strange the World is a show about people who write books. I interview my fellow author buddies from around the world, and we go in depth into their process, into what got them into the business, into what their goals are, their successes, their failures, their struggles. This is a show for authors, by authors, independent authors, big-name authors. Haven't had a big-name author yet, but, I'm holding out hope that we'll get that call one of these days. So the biggest name author I've ever had on is the man joining me today, Scott Cole.
Hello. Oh,
Scott Cole, author of Super Ghost and part of the new Bizarro Authors. Oh, hey. Where are we at here? Okay. Did you hear all that?
Yeah.
Good. That's what I didn't want to happen. Okay. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're good. Okay. Everything's good. All right. Technical difficulties, as always. Okay, Scott Cole, author of Super Ghost. The member number 2 we've had on this podcast of the new Bizarro Author Series class of 2015.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. We met at BizarroCon 2014, the 7th annual BizarroCon in Portland, Oregon, which is a gathering of all of the authors from around the world who participate in the newish genre of indie literature called Bizarro, which is a mashup of science fiction, horror, experimental fiction, slipstream, you name it. If it's uncategorizable, it gets the Bizarro designation. And we all gather once a year to talk about what is Bizarro, what was Bizarro this year, and what might Bizarro be next year. And the beautiful thing about this genre is we don't know. It's the genre of surprises. Every time a new Bizarro book comes out, it's a unique experience. And Super Ghost is no different. I just finished this book today. It was a pleasure to read, and we're going to talk to Scott Cole all about it. Sir, welcome. Pleasure to have you. Yes.
Thank you.
We've been talking about this since 4 a.m. on was it the early Monday morning? We got on separate flights to head back to our different man caves.
Yeah. I think it was right around 4 a.m. on a Monday morning, and way too early for a flight.
We shared a cab ride from the beautiful Edgefield Manor, which is where BizarroCon is held every year, which is a site that just has to be seen to be believed. Let's get away from that. But the last 2 interviews I've done, one for my show, and we did your new Bizarro Author Series class of 2015 brother, Tom Lucas. We were going to talk about BizarroCon, never got around to it. He's an interesting fellow. I hope you're a little less interesting, Scott, so that we can get to the weekend that we spent together.
I'll try my best.
I also wanted to talk about it, the interview I did with Jeremy Maddox, who also joined us. He does a podcast called Surreal Sermons, and I was a guest on his show. I had the pleasure of going on his show. We were going to talk about BizarroCon, never got around to that either. So today I would really like to be able to get into that. I want to hear your point of view from it. I want to share my own perspective. But right now, this is all about Scott Cole, author of Super Ghost. You can find everything you need to know about Scott Cole at 13 Visions. That's the number 13 and the word visions, 13visions.com. And it looks like you've got one book, Super Ghost, but you also have some stories available for people who want to get more in-depth into Scott Cole later on here after they hear your story. You can your life story. You can read the fictional tales, Drive at BizarroCentral.com, Whole at BizarroCentral.com, Dates at Weird Year, Birdie at Micro Horror, Rough Night at Smashed Cat Magazine. That sounds like a delightful publication. Belly of the Beast at the Twilight Zone Network. Is that the official Twilight Zone Network?
No, I believe that's a fan site
Oh, okay.
devoted to Twilight Zone and Night Gallery.
Completely illegal.
Yeah.
Dog
Exactly.
is in issue number 3 of 5x5 Fiction. Not sure what that means.
Yeah.
The
I'll tell you,
Landing. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm sorry. Yeah, 5x5 Fiction. I think it's still ongoing, and they put out really micro fiction, 25-word stories. So that's 5x5 is
words. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
five sentence, and not just 25 words, 5 sentences of 5 words each. So, yeah, talk about keeping it tight.
Yeah, I love those exercises, man. I went through a period where Shane McKenzie was doing horror stories, 140 characters on Twitter. So I started doing 140-word Bizarro stories on Twitter. And man, at first I was frustrated, and as time went on, I was doing them every day. And what I mean by every day is I would write like 10 of them all in one session, and then release them every day. And I did a couple weeks worth, and I eventually just got bored doing them. But man, that's a fun exercise, man. When you have to be extremely precise about every word you use, that is a great tool for writers. I encourage any writers listening right now to do that, to check out this 5x5 website, or also just try to type a horror story or a Bizarro story in 140 characters on Twitter, and it's going to test your vocabulary. It's going to test your ability to create coherent sentence structures and your storytelling ability. It really, I mean, you've got to be able to tell a story in just a few brief sentences, and man, it got fun. It got a really. I was actually inspired by my own Twitter posts. There are some of them that I've saved, and I want to go on and expand on them and actually be able to spend some time with them. But yeah, that's a cool cool exercise. So yeah, check out Scott's story over there at 5x5 called Dog, and then last free story you have up here on your site is called The Landing at Flashers in the Dark. Now that sounds dirty. That sounds naughty.
Yeah, I
Tell us
don't think
about that.
it's too risque, but yeah, that's one of those horror flash fiction websites. Micro horror, which you mentioned, is another one. Yeah, I'm a big fan. You mentioned writing stories that are 140 characters. I'm a big fan of flash fiction, which a lot of people define as being, under 1,000 words, and some people will say let's keep it under 500 words or something like that. I really like that. There's, like you mentioned, there's definitely a challenge to it, trying to tell a complete story in very few words. But I've always been a fan of short fiction and keeping it super short. I just really like it. I like reading it. I like writing it. It's a good challenge, and I think I'm pretty okay at it, for a long time. And I've mentioned this in some other interviews. I really just considered myself to be a short story writer and nothing else. Like, I never really knew if I would be able to write something any longer than a few thousand words. But I guess that's part of the story of how Super Ghost came to be.
Yeah, we'll get into that for sure. When I was growing up, my favorite, like my introduction to the horror genre, I started reading books in 3rd grade. The very first book I read was a Choose Your Own Adventure time travel dinosaur action adventure,
Nice.
which was real thick, but it's anytime you read a Choose Your Own Adventure, it's just a little short story. It's like a parallel universe. You just keep going and going and going. So it wasn't like I read a whole big book. I was just reading a bunch of short stories. But when I really got into my groove, it was Goosebumps books. And Goosebumps books are very short. The type is really big inside of those books, and they're only 120, 130 pages with that giant type. So they're basically short stories. They're some that I used to read. I used to be able to read like 2 in a day, and I would check them out from the library every week. And sort of as I got older, and I sort of got away from fiction for a while and just was sort of into movies, got real heavy into movies. When I got back into fiction, I found that a lot of that stuff from the 90s, a lot of that horror stuff, it was all, and I've talked about this on the show before, it was all 350 pages long. And it would bore the shit out of me because these authors didn't have 350 pages worth of stuff to say, so there's so much bloat and so many extra storylines or extra character development that just wasn't necessary to tell the story. What really got me back into fiction, and what and I sort of never left reading or having a big appetite for, was short fiction, and it was Clive Barker's books of blood and the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And it took a long time before I got into any longer works. Like I didn't read 1980s and 90s Stephen King books until just a few years ago, because I just couldn't deal with the length of those things. And I loved the short story format, and just how quickly you can get in and out of those things, and how precise a story like From Beyond from H.P. Lovecraft can tell you such a story in 15 pages. I mean, there's so much to it, and it's an art form, as you well know, as a self-proclaimed short story writer. You know that you can only tell the tip of the iceberg. You've got to be able to speak to your audience in such a way that you imply everything and give them next to nothing in order to get in and out of those stories and tell something compelling.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And yeah, you mentioned Clive Barker and Lovecraft. They were both real big for me in my younger days. I mentioned, being a short story writer, and that's what I was most interested in reading as well, similar to you. I talk about this with friends to this day, where if I'm interested in a new writer, maybe somebody I've heard about but I haven't read their work, the first thing I do, I always check to see if they have a short story collection, and that's the first thing I'll pick up.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that, man, because when I
don't know if I'm the norm, but that's
you and I are the same. That's what I like too. And I've been told, as I've gotten further into this career, I've been told that short story collections don't sell well. Personally, I release one every year. I love to put my short stories into a collection and put them out, and maybe they don't sell the best out of my stuff, but they are definitely some of the best received stuff that I put out. People really like to get into that, so I'm not sure. I get mixed messages. I mean, I know writers that are passionate about writing short fiction, and I know readers that are passionate about reading it, but the higher ups say that they don't sell well, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've heard that too. If it's true, I think it's a shame, because especially when it comes to horror, and absolutely Bizarro as well. I mean, that's some of the best stuff. It's those short stories just really pack a punch when they're well done, and yeah, I think it's the way to go.
So let's get
novellas are kind of that middle ground, where they're still pretty lean. They're a bit longer form, but they I don't know, they cut that bloat that you mentioned from those longer works, and maybe that's the sweet spot. I don't know.
Well, I can tell you this: some of my favorite books ever written are novellas. Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart is one of my favorite books. That's only 100 and something pages. Stephen King's The Mist is one of my favorite works by him. Also, writing under Richard Bachman, he wrote The Running Man, which is one of my favorite books. It's only about 200 pages. So some of the best stuff, my favorite H.P. Lovecraft stuff is maybe between 15 and 20,000 words. Stuff like Shadow Out of Time or The Dunwich Horror, stuff like that is a little bit longer than a short story, but definitely not novel length. So let's start talking about your story, man. Your life story. You got a passion.
Life story.
You got a passion for. Well, we could go the Jupiter ascending route, which I just saw last night, and we could start by how your parents fell in love before we can even get the goddamn story started. But how about we move up just a little bit in your timeline, and let's talk about your passion for reading and writing. When did you first develop a passion for reading fiction?
Let me see. I would say it was pretty early on. I honestly don't remember when I started just reading in general, but I do remember being, I want to say maybe 11 or 12, and there was kind of one of those like landmark moments, and that's when I discovered the Twilight Zone magazine. Came out in the 80s, and there was some guy who came around door to door. I don't even know if this still happens, but people would go door to door selling magazine subscriptions, and some kid from the neighborhood, and I remember, my mom called me to the door, and I looked, and I just kind of flipped open the catalog, and I saw the Twilight Zone magazine, and I had seen a few episodes of the Twilight Zone and reruns on TV, and was just completely amazed by it, and I thought to myself, oh my God, there's a magazine for the Twilight Zone? Absolutely, yes, sign me up, I want it. And I remember waiting and waiting for that first issue to come, and the first issue that arrived had Stephen King on the cover. It was a photo of him. I don't remember what story of his was in there, but I read that, and I read everything else in that issue. And for anybody who doesn't know the Twilight Zone magazine, it wasn't strictly focused on the TV show. I mean, it was a literary journal basically, but it had other features about sci-fi, fantasy, and horror in movies and on TV. And this was around the time that the Twilight Zone came back in the mid '80s. Amazing Stories was on, Tales from the Dark Side, shows like that. So I kind of learned about all this stuff going on at once. But I'd say that getting that magazine was probably what got me into reading stuff that I really, really liked, which ended up being mainly horror and little offshoots here and there with sci-fi and fantasy. But horror was really the thing for me. And Stephen King, of course, like a lot of people, he was the guy, the biggest name out there, and for good reason. And I devoured a bunch of his novels, and then started finding out about other writers, and finding short stories and the occasional novel, and just kind of fell in love with it.
So when did young Scott Cole transition from avid reader and consumer of the Twilight Zone magazine to Scott Cole, the dabbler in fiction of his own?
I would say, let me think. I would say that was probably maybe just before high school. I would probably dabble a little bit, write the occasional short story. I had ideas, but I didn't always sit down and spend the time to write them. But I was also a visual artist from a very young age, so I kind of veered more in that direction as far as my own creative output, drawing and eventually painting and doing some sculpture and things like that. And I would write short stories here and there. I would dabble in horrible poetry. There are notebooks full of awful poetry and song lyrics for songs that I have no musical talent to assemble, let alone an instrument to play them on.
Were they horror poetry? Were you trying to channel Edgar Allan Poe?
Yeah, some of it was probably more like I don't know, like slasher movie poetry.
Slasher movie poetry. I love it.
Something like that.
Yeah,
I don't
know. That's
fantastic.
I'm
gonna find those notebooks and burn them.
Well, that's a lot of people don't start this journey until later in life, and I don't think they realize how much crap you have inside yourself that you have to get out. And I talked with Tom about this on the last show, so I won't go too heavy into it, but you've got to live life before you really have anything to fucking say. Even if
it's true.
Even if you're talking about monsters and shit, man. Monsters are an allegory for the challenges in life. No matter what kind of monsters you're writing, no matter how weird you think you're being, you're writing your life experience. No matter how detached from it you think you are, psychologically you are telling your stories, and you have to live your stories before you can really tell them with any kind of substance to them at all. I wrote terrible shit before I transitioned to fiction. I was writing screenplays, and they were just fucking. I mean, I made most of them into feature films that are awful. So I got that out of the way before I came over into writing fiction. But much like you, I also starting around 6th grade, maybe seventh grade, I think probably sixth grade, I started drawing. And for the longest time, I never wrote anything. I think I may have talked about it on this show or another interview before, or maybe just talking with my friends. But I had this anxiety at my house. We had a typewriter, but we didn't have any kind of computers. I was raised by my grandparents, and to this day they don't have any computers. They just said fuck everything. About 1982, the advent of whenever the microwave came out is about as far forward technologically as my grandparents were ever comfortable becoming. They're still alive. I love them both. They're wonderful people, but they don't they're technologically challenged. I still get phone calls asking me to help them work the TV remote control when they accidentally hit the wrong button. But there was a typewriter in the house, and I couldn't. And I bought, I bought some whiteout, and the idea was to type these stories in my head out, and I just couldn't. I wasn't good at spelling. I was afraid that I had no mentor or anyone to help me through the process. So I thought every keystroke had to be perfect and the final draft, and it was just so much easier for me to draw out my ideas in pictures. And so I would come up with these elaborate monsters with this huge backstory behind them, but it was all oral. I would just show people these pictures and then tell them all about the story and history behind these monsters that I drew, and it was. Years later, I actually gave up on doing visual art, and just moved over into the written word, writing scripts and eventually fiction. And I've never really gone back. It's one of my big artistic regrets is that I never honed my skills as a visual artist because I really wanted to draw comic books as a kid.
Oh, nice. Yeah, well, I mean, you can always go back. There's
Yeah,
all
those flights of fancy are long gone. I found I found something I'm good at, and I'm going to stick to it. But let's talk about when Scott Cole uh, really started to take his writing career seriously. When did you sit down and start writing fiction, saying this is something I would love to see published one day?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, yeah, I would write the occasional short story. I never did anything with them. They stayed in a notebook, either written out longhand, or maybe I actually got around to doing a typed draft. But nothing ever happened with them. I think part of it is I wasn't totally sure what to do with them. And time went on, and I went to college and kind of set the writing aside, got busy with classes, and I was a fine arts major. Got busy with that, and the writing kind of went to the side a little bit for a while. And yeah, I would say let me see, maybe around. I don't know. I would dabble a little bit here and there, but nothing real serious until probably around 2007, I think it was, that I discovered Bizarro fiction. Was talking to a friend of mine, and he asked me if I had ever heard the term Bizarro fiction. We were talking about movies and short stories and writers that we liked and things like that, and he said, "Oh, have you heard of this genre, this term, Bizarro fiction? I read something somewhere about it, but I don't know a lot about it." I hadn't heard the term. I kind of had an idea of what he might be speaking of, because at the time I think I was watching Takashi Miike movies, and I had been a fan of David Lynch and Jodorowsky and filmmakers like that, and I knew that there was really weird stuff out there. So I kind of had some idea of what he might be talking about, but I had not actually heard that term, Bizarro fiction. I went online, looked it up, and immediately found, the early days of the Bizarro scene. I found Carlton Mellick III. I found Kevin L. Donaghy, and D. Harlan Wilson. Those were like the three big names that I found at first, and Eraserhead Press, and let me see, Afterbirth Books, I think, was around then. I can't remember if Swallowdown was around then. And I was just exploring these websites and seeing the crazy titles of these books that these guys were writing, and I would read the synopses, and I fell in love immediately. I was amazed that this stuff was out there, and so I ordered a pile of books and got them and read and never looked back. Um, and really reading that stuff is what got me back into writing. Discovering that scene, reading these crazy stories, that kind of told me that maybe some of the stuff that I was writing, that I maybe had some insecurities about in terms of what I would possibly do with it, do with them, that maybe that gave me the nudge that I needed to say, yeah, you can write this stuff, and maybe there is a home for it. It was still a few years where I was writing short stories before I, ever got anything out into the world. But that, like I said, that was maybe that nudge that I needed to focus on it a little bit more and start writing these weird stories.
Well, I think there was a period in the late '80s and early '90s where people that had the kind of things to say that the filmmakers that you're talking about, David Lynch and guys like Peter Jackson and Sam Raimi, who were making these extreme splatter horror movies. The fiction was still caught up in the 1970s sort of classical horror, and it took writers like Poppy Z. Bright and John Skipp and Craig Spector to bring that splatterpunk attitude into fiction in the 90s, but there was still that divide between the writer and the big publisher that was publishing those guys, and sort of that need for the long 350-page paperback. And I think a lot of people still felt confined. Like, as weird and as cool and as inspiring as guys like Clive Barker and the ones I mentioned were in forwarding and kind of evolving and progressing horror, there were still sort of limitations put on it, or a barrier put on it, where people didn't necessarily want to have to write a 350-page novel, get an agent, and have to maybe not that they didn't want to, but it was a daunting task to say, okay, I'm going to be a novelist, and this is and these are the type of novels I'm going to write. And I think it really took that push towards bizarro fiction in the 2000s to really open up the floodgates, and those of us that wanted to just write weird shit with completely boundaryless weird shit finally had that avenue through bizarro fiction. And bizarro fiction and indie horror sort of go hand in hand. The guys like Shane McKenzie, that have come along in this sort of with the wave of Bizarro, but after guys like Edward Lee and Brian Keene, who were also, and even Wrath James White, who were sort of put into that very, very late period of the big publisher game, of the agent, of the 350-page paperback. This new wave of horror guys sort of came through the gates right along with Bizarro, which is why I think that Deadite Press is so successful for Eraserhead, as an imprint of Eraserhead, because people like me and others, yourself included, I'm sure, really like to go back and forth between the really weird and the really brutal, and just straight up horror with not necessarily weirdness, not necessarily comedy, but just really telling a visceral horror story without the confines of having to worry about, well, this is going to be my big novel, and I'm going to send it to agents, and we can just do whatever we want to at this point, and they can become 100-page novels, they can become 60-page novelettes, they can become short stories, whatever we want them to be, and they're no longer confined by those restrictions of the 90s. And I think that has inspired a lot of us. I think that's why there's so many people that like to attend things like BizarroCon, and when Wrath James White was putting on KillerCon or World Horror Con, there's a reason. There's so many people involved in that now. It's because we have so much freedom to create and express ourselves. today. Now, that doesn't always translate into sales. So there is a generation of people that really don't like the freedom that we have these days, because they used to be able to pull, when those guys that were, saying like, I am a novelist, this is my career, I have an agent, I found success. Those guys were pulling $25,000 advances in the 90s. They're not pulling advances at all now. So there's a give and take for this freedom. We can do whatever we want, but good luck keeping out of the day job in the process.
It's true. Yeah, that's true in a lot of different fields. They call it the democratization of technology. Print on demand, has definitely made a lot of this stuff possible, partially because there's a much smaller investment involved, and so maybe people are willing to take bigger chances and put some of the weirder stuff or the gorier horror stuff out there. I see the same thing. I've told you I work in the print industry, and I do some graphic design and digital art and things like that. It's the same thing there. Everybody in your life now has a copy of Photoshop, and a lot of them probably consider themselves graphic designers or artists, and maybe they don't have all the tools necessary to use it properly.
Definitely.
Anytime you put something like that in the hands of the people, it's a great thing in many ways, because it does allow unheard voices to come through, and you find those jewels out there that you never would have found, never would have known about. But it comes with a lot of crap too. So.
Yep. Well, and it's sort of, photography's gone through the same thing, where photography studios are all but completely gone. These days, I think most even the big the chain stores in malls that take your picture, for special events, Easter and you still got Santa Claus, of course, because he's Santa Claus, and they kind of put the money into the backdrop and stuff that your kids are getting pictures in. But as far as those like photography studios in malls where you go to get your theme pictures for your 1 year, kids 1 year old or whatever, even those are starting to drop like flies, because our phones are better cameras than they had in the fucking 90s.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that people are good photographers? No, that's the thing.
Some of them are. Yeah,
some of them are great, but a lot art, and a lot of people don't care, and that's the problem. The people that say, well, I could pay a lot of money and have it done well, or I could have my cousin John do it for free, and I really don't care if it sucks or not because it's free. And that's sort of the world we live in now. And the same can be said for fiction. There's a lot of crap on Kindle. There's a lot of shit you can buy for 99 cents digitally. But I think that's the importance of community, and I think that's why this Bizarro community and the indie horror community is so important and so vital to guys like us, is because you put out Super Ghost, and suddenly you're Scott Cole, new Bizarro Author Series, class of 2015, author of Super Ghost, not just Scott Cole, the guy who writes short stories. And that's not you may not get rich off of the sales from this book, but you suddenly have a kind of street cred among readers of this sort of stuff that says, this isn't your average Joe. This is a guy that got through several editors, quality checking to make sure that the best stories are getting out there in the world. And having just read Super Ghost myself, I can tell you that this is a high quality work, and the work of definitely a craftsman. There's things that are done and referenced in this book in the first act that come back in the third act that can't an amateur author isn't going to be able to get the nuances of these characters, the character development of these guys, and also the callbacks to the stuff that you foreshadow and set up in the beginning of the book that pay off then later on at the end of the book. That's an average 99-cent Kindle ebook, taken by Tetris blocks, the erotic story of Tetris isn't necessarily going to have that kind of quality to it. So I think it's important to have things like the new Bizarro Author Series. We're almost there, but we're not quite there yet. I want to talk about Scott Cole. When you're now a college graduate, you're now, I'm assuming, a full-time graphic designer, and you have decided, you know what? I've read all this Bizarro fiction. If Carlton Mellett can do it, god damn it, so concise. Cole, when did you really knuckle down and start producing this short fiction in such a way that you really wanted it to be read? And where did you submit your stories to? Tell me about your first sale.
Let's see. So that was probably, I'm going to say my first sale was probably around 2009, maybe 2008, 2009. I don't remember off the top of my head for sure which year, but I was writing some Bizarro stuff, but I was also writing just straightforward horror. I was writing zombie stories like a lot of people, and so yeah, my first real sale was a zombie story that I sold to a company called the Library of the Living Dead, and they put out all sorts of zombie-themed anthologies and a few novels here and there. And they had started to nurture a little bit of a community online, and I discovered them and submitted a couple stories to different anthologies and got my first acceptance, which was in a book called Zombonauts, which was yes, which was zombie stories set in space.
Yes.
For space. So
yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Space zombie.
Definitely a very close to Bizarro. I don't know if I would call it quite there, but definitely
B-movie.
Strange horror.
Yeah. So how long had you been taking writing seriously again before this?
Yeah, a couple years. I had done it before, set it aside. I kind of got back into it, and I don't know. I feel like a lot of my writing education probably came from reading other people's stuff, because you read other people's works and you pick up on things that you like that they did and things that you don't like, and I might have written this a little bit differently. Not that every reader does that, but I think a lot of writers do when they read. Yeah, I kind of learned a bit about writing through reading, and so even if I wasn't actually sitting down at the keyboard writing something, things were still going on in the back of my head, and that's part of the process too. Yeah, so I sold that story and just went from there and just started contributing to more and more anthologies, and got some acceptances, got a lot of rejections, just kept at it.
How many rejections did you have before your space zombie stories? Did you at any point, because you were obviously this was not your main focus in life, so it wasn't necessarily do or die for you. So did rejections really bother you that much, or was it just something where you were like, well, one day it'll happen, and I'll just keep writing until that happens?
It was kind of something I was doing for fun, just as an artistic outlet. I've always been creative in one way or another. Like I said, I was always doing visual art from a very young age, and things just started to shift a little bit more to writing. I don't know. I think I had sent out a whole bunch of stories to different places, and I was waiting to hear back. So I think that story Acceptance was actually the first one that I heard back about.
Look at you, Scott Cole.
That was a good feeling. Of course, that was followed by a whole bunch of rejections.
Right.
That, sank me right back down.
Oh, but but sometimes that's the most important thing. There is that a lot of guys. I've got friends that went through long periods of time before they ever got an acceptance, and it can kill you. Even that, because as human beings, for whatever reason, we don't want everything we desire. We want to pursue everything we desire with small victories in between a legion of defeats. It's sort of what the human condition is, I think, all leading up to a death and eternal oblivion, which is it's a wonderful balance somehow. It sort of keeps keeps us going as human beings. For some reason, we're terrible little creatures that require all of this misery to get going. But I would think that having that that first dose right there, your first hit of smack, your first line of coke there right at the beginning, that nice high of saying like, oh, I wrote something and people like it. I do have a big dick.
Yeah.
My dick is a lot bigger than I thought it was. That probably really, probably softened the blow from those rejections, I would assume.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it was a great feeling. Everybody wants acceptance, whether they want to admit it or not. So yeah, it was a great feeling to find out that an editor that I sent my story off to liked it, and not just liked it, but actually wanted to put it out into the world so that other people could read it. Great thing. And they sent me a check. I like an actual physical check in the mail. It was great to get that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was a great feeling.
Now, did you specifically write these zombie and space stories for the anthology after you read the call for it, or did you happen to be writing space zombie adventures and say I want and go looking for a space zombie anthology to submit to?
I was writing a number of different zombie stories, and I was very conscious of the fact that there were a lot of zombie stories out there. Of course, this was part of that big wave that's really still happening, I think, to some extent. Although maybe it's died down a little bit in terms of the written word. So yeah, I was writing my take on zombie stories, trying to do something a little bit different here and there. And yeah, I found out about this publisher, found them online, and they had a forum on their website that listed all their different calls for entries, and so that story I wrote specifically to submit to that anthology.
Excellent.
And
That's
yeah.
a good feeling. It's a great feeling, man, whenever you sit down and specifically, because it's 50-50, man. I'm going to
Yeah.
write this fucking story that's specifically for this anthology, and if it gets rejected, where the fuck else is it going to go? Who the
Yeah.
fuck is going to take a space zombie story if the space zombie anthology doesn't like it? So it's really, I used to be of the opinion that one should not write specifically to an anthology specifically for that reason, because a lot of times it's going to be, your content is going to be so specific to that anthology that story is going to be virtually useless if it gets rejected. But as time has gone on, I found myself writing more and more stories specifically for anthologies. Now, that might be because my acceptance rate has drastically increased the longer I've been a writer, and the larger my fan base grows and the better I've become as a writer. Maybe it's just a confidence thing, and I realize that when I write a story for an anthology, maybe my chances are a little better than 50-50 because of my resume and because of the following that I've developed over the years. These days it's almost like a challenge when I see an anthology that's opening up. I'm in the middle of writing a Swords and Cthulhu story. So the anthology is called Swords and Cthulhu, or maybe that's not what the name is going to be, but that's what the call for submissions is. It seems to be what the title is, but maybe the title itself will change. But I'm almost certain that this thing is going to be rejected, but I just love the challenge. To sit down and say, okay, I have a very specific thing I have to write, and it's either going to go in or bust. It's either going to be, success or failure, and it's kind of a buzz now for me when I sit down to write these stories specifically for themed anthologies. It's a nice challenge, and it really motivates me to do my best with that story, and I've gotten rejected recently a couple of times doing that, and it kind of burns a little bit. But I put out short story collections every year, so the worst that's going to happen to me is the story appears as an previously unpublished work from Kevin Strange. So I get to promote it as something special if they don't end up in a book. So there's that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? What are you more comfortable doing? Are you more comfortable writing straight out of your brain, or are you more comfortable writing a theme toward an anthology?
Yeah, I would say I'm more comfortable just with the random ideas that just come to me. I can certainly write for a call for submissions for an anthology, and I've done it numerous times. But I'd say more often than not, it's just some weird idea that I feel like it has legs, so I take it and run with it and see what happens. But
Now, I want to get before we get into the nitty gritty here. We start talking about Super Ghosts and new Bizarro Author Series, your experience with Eraserhead and BizarroCon, and what you have in the future. Let's talk a little bit about just Scott Cole, the writer. Do you, through this process, you said you had a friend that asked you if you had heard of Bizarro. You sort of bought a bunch of the books and started writing sort of Bizarro, but maybe it just was sort of the catalyst that got you really writing again and trying to submit stuff. Is this friend an in real life friend or an online friend? What does your support system look like in Scott Cole's life? Do you have fellow writers around you that and you guys have sort of like, or artists in general? You said you're a visual artist, you're a graphic designer. Do you pal around with other writers and artists and sort of keep each other going, or is this an online community thing?
That particular friend is an artist named Amzie Emmons, who friend of mine. We went to college together years ago, and we were roommates after that. And then we both kind of moved around to different parts of the country, and you know, now he's here in Philadelphia, where I am, and yeah, we see each other from time to time. He's not a writer. He is a visual artist and an arts professor, and yeah, but he's always been a reader, and yeah, it was, like I said, it was just something he had kind of heard the term, thought that it was something that I might have known about or would be interested in, and he asked me what I thought. I do, yeah, Adam Caesar. He's a good friend of mine, horror writer.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Adam Caesar, but I've always pronounced his last name Cesar.
Yeah.
You told me that I'm pronouncing his name wrong. It's Caesar.
He says it's Caesar. Yes.
Well, what's the fucking E about on the end?
You'll have to ask him about that.
I think he pronounces his name.
Him on the show.
I think he pronounced his name wrong. Oh, I would love to have Adam on the show. Adam's a cool dude.
Yeah, he's a great guy, a great writer. If anybody watching that has not read any of his stuff, I highly recommend it. Great horror writer, and he's also co-written hey, there you go, Tribesman. Yeah, that's the one that put him on the map. And yeah, he's co-written a number of books with other people. He's got his most recent thing. Well, he's got two very recent things: Exponential, which is his own novel, and he also co-wrote something called Bottom Feeders with Cameron Pierce from Eraserhead and Lazy Fascist. And, yeah.
He's also one of two writers that landed in the Big Five this year.
That's right.
He gets to publish through, now it's Hydra, right? It's an imprint of who is it an imprint of? I forget already.
Random House.
Yeah. And then so he's got, what is that? I don't know how this turned into Adam Caesar's show, but what does he have coming out to
That's I think it comes out this summer. I forget, May, June, something like that. Yeah, he's got one, and then I think a month after his comes out, Carlton Mellick III has one right on the heels of that. So
that's a big deal for us. That's a big deal for the genre. That's
a
big deal for the community, because that's a nice hardcore horror book and a nice Bizarro book. Neither guy compromised anything. I talked to Carlton at length about his book Clown Fellas, and he just wrote a book. He just wrote a book the same as he would have written a book for Eraserhead, the same as he would write any Bizarro book. He didn't get the call from the Big Five and have to compromise his vision at all. That's a huge, big deal for us, because if these books are successful, this company is going to come, and other companies are going to come calling to the rest of us, and they're going to want to put out books that are going to go to a much bigger, much more mainstream audience. But the key is uncompromised. They're going to get pure, unfiltered, hardcore horror and Bizarro, and that's huge news for us.
Yeah, it's a great thing, and that really shows that the kind of stuff that we're doing is having an impact on really a much larger industry. If the you know, some of the big publishers are going to come find some of these, you know, in the mainstream sense, smaller names, you know, they are big names in the scene that we're all very interested in. But yeah, if these big publishers are going to come give these guys a shot. That really tells you something, and I hope they're very successful, and for their own sake as well as for everybody else in the scene. Yeah.
So that got me off on a tangent, but have you known Adam since the beginning of his career? Or is that you had mentioned? I started asking you who your friends were,
Yeah.
and I meant back in the day when you were doing zombie fiction. Were you
Yeah.
doing zombie fiction with Adam?
No. I became a fan of his when Tribesmen originally came out. The one you just held up is the reissue. But it originally came out. I read it right away because I thought to myself, oh my god, a cannibal book? That's amazing. Because I've always been a film fan, and I'm horror exploitation type films, all that kind of stuff. And I thought to myself, that's amazing. I got to pick it up. I read it. I became a fan. We started talking online, and eventually he moved to Philly, and we've been hanging out ever since. So yeah, he's a guy that I might bounce writing ideas off of now, but not. I didn't know him at that time when I was writing my little zombie tales.
All right. So
so I had my artist friend Amzi, who I mentioned, and a lot of my friends are actually film people, not like big Hollywood bigwigs, but a lot of indie filmmakers, some film critics, and just people who are film geeks. So we go to a lot of things, a lot of screenings and things like that.
are you familiar with Mike Lombardo, Real Splatter?
Yeah. I don't know him personally, but definitely familiar with him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's over in East Pete. I don't know how far that is from you.
I'm not totally sure where he's based. Adam knows him a bit though. Yeah.
Mike's a real cool fucker, and he helped me. We both got started in the same year. We both started releasing short films in the same year, and sort of found each other on MySpace right away. And we've stayed real close friends. We don't get to talk a lot because we're both really busy, but we've stayed real close friends ever since. And we helped each other. He sent me some software early on to help me edit my films, and I've been there, as emotional support for him. I've ordered some special effects props, some fabrications from him in the past, and he's a great dude. I love his career. I love where it's headed, and there's nothing but great things for him, and hopefully the rest of that Pennsylvania scene. You guys have terrible fucking weather up there. I don't know how you fucking film anything, but I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing up there.
Yeah. There's a lot of great people here. Definitely. Some of my other friends I know. Dan Tabor, he's an indie filmmaker. Matt Garrett is another guy. He just released a film called Morris County through Unearthed, I believe. Just put that out. It's a three short stories, kind of an anthology thing.
Right on.
Really good stuff.
So let's talk about Scott Cole's process. I assume with the Super Ghost coming out and everything you went through to get that published, that you're ready to take put writing probably more in the driver's seat than it has been in the past. So let's talk about, or is that not true, or are you still?
Definitely. Writing has, for past several years, writing has been I would say the foremost creative outlet. I do still make visual art. I do graphic design and illustration and things like that. But
very cool illustrations over at 13visions.com. You can check out Scott's illustrations, which I think are awesome. You have a cartoony style, but it has an edge to it that I think looks really neat. Very unique. I'll definitely be able to spot your work from now on. And then you also have more of the graphic design side, right, where you sort of use Photoshop filters and whatnot to create your works.
Yeah, a lot of different things. Yeah, and in the past I've done pen and ink drawings and paintings and sculpture and things like that. So yeah, what's the stuff on that site is a very small sampling of the work I've done. Just to kind of give people a taste. Yep.
So let's talk about
writing
Yeah, let's talk
I'm
about
sorry.
that process. You said you've taken it as sort of your primary art form for the last couple of years. What does the writing day look like for Scott Cole when you get up?
Uh, well, I mean, I still have the day job, so that's most days that's what I'm doing. And have to try to find time or make time around that to get writing done. I don't write every day. I know a lot of writers will tell you that that's the first thing you got to do is sit down and write every day. I think it's different for different people. I'm not saying that that's bad advice. I think that's really good advice. But it's just not something that I am always able to make time for. Um, and it's certainly something I can't do at work. Sometimes it's before work. Most of the time, it's going to be in the evening, after work, or on weekends, whenever I can find time to do it. Yeah.
And do you find yourself doing sort of marathon writing, like when you do cut out that piece of time for yourself? Do you find yourself trying to get through a complete story, a complete work in one session or a couple of sessions, or do you find just being able to peck away at something slowly works best for you?
It depends on the story for me. Um, I kind of marathon when I wrote Super Ghost. That was sort of several marathons that were spaced out along a longer timeline. Um, Short stories, it depends on the story, really. If I can blast through it start to finish, I will if it's working. I try to let it be organic. I try not to force anything. At the same time, I'm not afraid to make a mistake because there's always a delete key. There's always revisions. Just because you've typed something out doesn't mean it's carved in stone.
And I
Um,
would assume that your work as a visual artist has sort of taught you that, because a lot of authors have this anxiety that, and like I
yeah,
said, I did when I was a kid and I was trying to type on that typewriter. I thought every keystroke was the end, and that
yeah,
if I didn't build this thing perfectly the first time, it was a failure. As a visual artist, I would think that going through the sketching process and erasing and adding and sort of slowly building your work up to, or even sculpting and slowly building your work up to its finished product must have helped your confidence as a writer to know that, like, well, I just have to sketch this fucking thing out. I just have to put the fucking words to the fucking page,
yeah.
and I can go back and sort of revise it and make it pretty later.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and to bring it back to visual art again, a lot of painters will do what's called an underpainting, and that's really just a sketch, and it might be monochromatic, and it's just to kind of get a rough idea of what the composition is and where the highlights and shadows are going to be, and then you go back in and you're basically doing another draft on top of that, and then you're going to paint in more details and go in and touch up this and that and add more highlights and do this and that, and that's just like another draft of a story that you're writing.
And I think that's easier to explain visually because you can show people the process. This is step
Yeah,
one, step two, step three, step four. Writers, on the other hand, writers are fucked up. First of all, they're just fucked up people in general. I know writers that refuse to show their first draft to anybody. I know writers that refuse to show their final draft to anybody. They just write and then they write things and then bury them and then say, no, you'll never see it. I've got a theme among some of my writer friends is that maybe they started writing when they were younger, and my mom busted in my room and she found my writings, and I didn't write again for 20 years. Writers are fucked up. So it's difficult to show that process when writing. The first draft, the second version, the third version, and the final version. Obviously, you're not going to want to sit and read a shitty first draft of somebody's book to where you can you can look at the sketch of someone's painting or the underpainting, and then look over at the final version. That only takes a second to do. So visually, it's easy to understand, whereas with writing, it's much more difficult to really express that other than using a physical analogy. But it's exactly what you have to do. You have to write. You have to get the idea onto paper before you can make it good. And so many writers agonize over that beginning process. It's just write the shit. write it. You know what you
Yeah.
want to write. You don't have to get it right the first time. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Um, and
A lot of
I
writers
think,
will call that the vomit draft,
or the
where you
bullshit
just,
draft, yeah.
yeah, exactly. You just get it out there, put something down that you can go back to and revise and make adjustments to,
Yeah, you
and
have to,
eventually
and
it'll be something good, hopefully.
yeah, definitely. And I find myself sort of in a position sometimes where I'll sit down to write, and it's just not. I'm just not getting what's here is just not appearing down here. But then once I get a few paragraphs in and I go back, then it starts to. I have to have that shitty sentence
Yeah.
before I really know what the good sentence is. The
Yeah.
good sentence isn't always here. Just because I see a lich woman with 3 tits and red hair doesn't necessarily mean I can describe that the first time I write that sentence. Sometimes I need to write it 3 or 4 times before it really is like, all right, that's the best way to do that. And we sort of fight with ourselves about that. Like, well, this
Yeah.
is this is just I just don't. Oh, fuck it. I'm not writing today. Today I'm not the writer. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's true though. Sometimes you're so focused on a detail of the story, and you don't sit down and actually write it down. Once you actually do that and get it down on screen or on paper or whatever your process is, it's like, oh, I can forget about that for a minute, and then you come back to your other ideas and how you can make it better, and you're not quite so focused on whatever that the horribleness of whatever that idea is.
Definitely, and it almost for me anyway, personally, like once I've forgotten about it and let it fucking go, once I've released it and I go down and write a few more paragraphs or a few more pages, maybe even be done for the day and go back to it the next day and open it back up, it's like, oh, this is what this should be, and it's fine,
Yep.
and it's no big deal, even though I was fucking agonizing over it for an hour. Let's get a little bit further down the field. So you're a seasoned space zombie expert with cashable checks coming in the mail.
That's
Scott
right.
Scott Cole, the published author.
Big time.
Where do we get?
Yeah.
What's the puzzle piece that's between space zombies and super ghost?
Well, let's see. I mean, I continued writing short stories, some more straightforward horror stuff, and but I was gravitating more toward bizarro fiction. Like I said, sending stories out, getting a number of rejections, landing a few stories in places. Um, the ones you mentioned earlier that are linked on my website, those are all online somewhere, free to read. And yeah, I started sending others out. I got a story, one of those that's free to read called Whole, that landed on BizarroCentral.com. That was, when was that? Maybe 2011, 2012, something like that. At the time, Kirsten Aileen was the editor of the Flash Fiction part of Bizarro Central. She accepted that story. Let's see. Yeah, just sending stories out to different places. I had another story that got into the magazine of Bizarro Fiction, a story called Violins for Sale. Yeah, I was just trying to send short stories out different places. Meanwhile, I was very aware of the new Bizarro Author Series, and definitely interested in trying to see if I could get a book published. Originally, I was thinking, oh, it'd be great if I could collect a bunch of my short stories and put them out as a collection. It turns out, like we were saying earlier, maybe those aren't the most saleable. And maybe novels and novellas are better in terms of what the marketplace is looking for. And I was trying to figure out how to do that, how to write something longer. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know if I would ever write anything that was a longer form, anything that was longer than 3,000 words or so.
Is that the
But
longest story you had ever written before Super Ghost?
yeah, something like that. Maybe
3,000
35.
words.
Yeah, maybe 3,500 at
Scott
the
Cole.
most.
That's
I like.
brief.
I know. I like to keep things
Translated
concise.
translated into a physical book, 3,000 words for those listening is about 15 pages, 10 pages, 10 pages.
Yeah, something like
So
that.
it's not very long.
No.
Um, I found personally when I started to write short stories, for the longest time, I couldn't write anything shorter than 12,500 words. Everything I wrote, and I think it's because I came from film, and I'll spare my listeners hearing the story for the thousandth time, but uh, coming from film, my every story that I'd ever written in a screenplay had 3 acts, and usually about 12 to 15 scenes. So, as I sit down to write short fiction, I'm like, well, I'm going to keep this real brief. I'm only going to write 8 scenes.
Wow.
And as you know, writing things that are 3,000 to 3,500 words or 10 to 12 pages, you pretty much you're telling one scene, 1.5 scenes, maybe 2 scenes, and you're in and out.
Yeah.
You're not telling a story that has multiple perspective changes between characters. You're not telling things that happen over usually over sweeping long periods of time, unless your story is more narration than it is actual in the moment dialogue and action. And it took me several years of trial and error before I was able to get my fiction down to the 3,000 to 5,000 word range. But I think I'm pretty good at it these days. I've been writing a hell of a lot of short fiction lately, and I've become able to really keep that shit precise. But in the beginning, dude, it was uh, my stuff was 12, 16, 20,000 words right off the bat, and
Yeah.
20 to 25,000 words is a fucking is a new Bizarro Author Series novella.
Yeah. Yeah. And for some reason I came at it from the other direction, and that just seemed I I don't know, it just seemed unattainable. That word count just seemed difficult for some reason, and then I hit upon that idea that you just sort of alluded to, which is kind of changing perspectives and switching back and forth between two sets of characters, and that was one of the sparks for me that helped me figure out how to write something a bit longer. It seems like a simple thing in retrospect, but for whatever reason, it just didn't click for me until that point.
Well, I can tell you this: Super Ghost does not feel in any way, shape, or form bloated or like you had to sort of pad your word count to get it up to a certain level. It's a very even and balanced story, and I don't feel like there's any fat on it at all. It definitely feels like you wrote what you set out to write, and you added just everything it needed. Everything's there. I don't think
Yeah.
there aren't any loose ends. Everything wraps up great, and it felt like a seasoned veteran wrote that book, so he did a great job on it.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, the writing process for it. Once I figured that out, it really did come. Uh, the writing process was more natural, and it was a good feeling. Like, oh, I finally figured this out, and it's working.
Yeah.
And I
Let's
had a good
back
time with it.
let's back up though, and let's
Sure.
figure out how that even happened. How you got the
Yeah.
opportunity to write Super Ghost. You came from zombie space fiction. You started to get stuff published throughout the online community and in other anthologies. You
Yeah.
finally said, you know what? I'm gonna fucking dig in, and I'm gonna try to get this new Bizarre author gig. So what steps did it take for
Well,
aspiring writers out there and fans of the show that are interested in this new Bizarro Author Series? Let's tell the story of how
yeah.
Scott Cole made it into the select few, the elite of the Eraserhead Press new Bizarro Author Series class.
Yes. Well, yeah, as I said, I was trying to figure out how to write something longer, and um, there was I've mentioned this in some other interviews too. There was a moment that I had where I had two different short story ideas. I have short story ideas all the time. I keep a notebook and I might make notes on my phone, and a lot of writers do this. Uh, short story ideas or fragments of ideas constantly, and so I keep track of them because otherwise they're just going to evaporate. So there were these two story ideas that I had. One of them being the concept of sort of a Dr. Frankenstein, a mad scientist who assembles phantom limbs into something larger. And then I had another idea that was something that comes up a bit later in the book. I had this moment where it just dawned on me out of nowhere, oh, these two ideas, these are going to work really well together, and maybe that's what's going to work. Maybe that's what's going to get me to write something a bit longer. I could do a novella, and it just clicked for me. Of course, the lights in the movie theater that I was sitting in at the time were just going down, and the movie was about to start. And
oh,
so
no.
I spent 2 hours like watching a movie and kind of freaking out, and my mind was just absolutely racing about this idea that, yeah, this has legs. This is going to work. I can do this. But I sat through the movie, and as soon as it ended and the lights came back up, I pulled out my phone and started typing notes furiously as fast as I could with my thumbs. And my friend sitting next to me wants to talk about the movie, and hold on. I gotta get this down. Spend a few minutes doing
fucking
that.
phantom limbs, dog. You got
Yeah.
a minute.
Exactly. And so yeah, I thought it's gonna work. I can do this. And that was late. Let me see. That was probably summer of 2013, and late summer, early fall. And in November of that year, I went to BizarroCon for the first time. And just maybe a month before I went to BizarroCon, I sat down and banged out the first draft. Sat down, after work on weeknights, and then weekends pretty much all day. And over the course of 2 weeks, I banged out the first draft of Super Ghost. Decided to let it sit. Went to BizarroCon for my first time, November of 2013. And started meeting people, met all these authors whose work I had read and was a fan of. And the very first night I was there, I bumped into Spike Marlowe, and I happened to be talking to somebody as I was moving through the room and saying something like, oh, I have this book that I'm working on, and I'm going to try for the NBAS next year. And as I said that, I'm like walking past Spike, and she heard me say that, and, oh, what's your idea? So I kind of was on the spot and just kind of gave her the elevator pitch.
You managed to get a pitch with one of the authors of the new Bizarro Author Series by chance as you walked through the room. That is the beauty of BizarroCon, is there's so many little moments like that.
Yeah.
And none of them are, and they all feel so organic. None of them feel forced like that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It was like accidental,
It's amazing you tell it like that, because that's the one thing I tell people is don't go with a stack of don't go with a manila envelope that's got all your ideas in it and think you have to set a meeting. You're going to be drinking a beer with an editor, and it's just going to come up. It's going to come up because these are all if they're not writers, they're editors, and if they're not that, they're both. And it's everybody, and there's 100 of us, so that's a fantastic story. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was kind of the beginning of it, and she said, "Oh, what's your idea?" And I gave her the quick elevator pitch.
Can you give me the elevator pitch now? Do you remember what it was?
The elevator pitch is basically a mad scientist masquerading as a phantom limb therapist is actually stealing the phantom limbs from his patients, and he takes them and assembles them into a giant ghost monster to destroy his detractors along with the city.
And
that's basically it.
And she loved it, huh?
Yeah, she said, "Oh, that sounds great," and send me an email. So I enjoyed the rest of BizarroCon and continued meeting people and having great conversations and so on, and attending panels and all that stuff. And I went back home and eventually dug in and did a second draft, and then let it sit for a week or two, did a third draft, then I had a couple people read it, and got some notes and made some revisions, and then I finally said, okay, I think it's where I want it to be, and I sent Spike an email and sent my submission and waited and got very nervous.
Waited some more.
got very nervous, and then eventually got the email saying that she was interested in working with me on this, and I guess the rest is history. I mean, we did a
wait if you care to divulge that information, because a lot of the reason I ask is because a lot of authors get really discouraged if they don't hear back exactly 7 minutes later from an editor.
Oh, yeah, that's that's ridiculous. Just in terms of life in general, not everybody. I know we've all got our phones on us constantly. I get that, but yeah, don't expect a business email from somebody immediately. Give them time, and especially if you're submitting a book that somebody needs to sit down and read and decide if they're interested in. I mean, they might need to read it a few times.
Definitely.
So, yeah, it was
pit it up against the rest of the submissions. Figure out,
yeah,
what the balance is going to be. It's not something that can just be done overnight. And
no.
Another thing that I've run into recently here, and I've seen a lot in the past, and I still just do not understand this mentality, is this disdain for form letter rejections. You have to address me personally and tell me exactly why you don't like my story so I can fix it and send it to the next guy, asshole. It's this attitude. It's this entitlement of, well, I don't care if you don't like it, but you have to tell me why. Nobody has to tell you anything. And they don't have to respond to you at all. And they don't have to respond to you in the time you would like them to respond to.
That's right.
And they don't even have to respond to you in the time that they say they're going to respond to you, because that is an estimated amount of time. If you submit to a market that says the estimated amount of time for a response is 4 to 6 weeks, that does not mean you're going to get an email on the first day of the 4th week. It just doesn't. That's not how life works. That's not how business works. There's an ebb and a flow. A lot of times there's a huge influx of submissions, and that 6 weeks might turn into 16 weeks, and you may get a form letter rejection that says, thank you, sir or ma'am, we are not interested in your story at this time, and you don't deserve anything more than that, because they have a business to run, and they have things they have to take care of, and they have an anthology or a magazine or whatever it is that they have to produce, and your little feelings have nothing to do with that. The longest I've ever waited to hear back from a submission is 1.5 years, and it was a rejection. And at the time of the rejection, I got 0 feedback. I didn't get feedback until BizarroCon, and it was not solicited. I did not ask for the feedback. I was freely given the feedback. By the way, this is why we didn't accept that novella, in case you were wondering, from 1.5 years ago when you submitted it. And you know what? I took it, I smiled and said, thank you very much. You didn't have to tell me that, because they don't have to tell you that. You aren't owed. You aren't entitled anything from a publisher. Nothing. You are entitled, if you sign a contract for a certain amount of money, you are entitled for that amount of money. And that's it. That's the only thing you're entitled to. As a writer, it's imperative that you don't put all of your emotional energy into a single submission to a single publisher or a single magazine or a market. You have to be constantly sending out stories. 4 stories, 5 stories, 6 stories, and when they're rejected, send them around to the other places. You have to be constantly in a state of flux.
Yep,
and these stories need to be revised and moved around and sent to different places over and over again. And while that's happening, you're going to get rejections here, you're going to get acceptances here. Sometimes you're going to get a personal rejection where they're going to tell you what you did wrong and what you could do right. And most of the time, you're not going to hear anything, not even a form letter. So when you get a form letter, be happy you got even that. Sorry, I had to go on that. I had to go on that rant, Scott Cole. Did you want to say how long?
I could tell that had been building up for a while.
Yeah.
It was I it was a couple months, maybe 2 months. We were also working. This series is not like every other publishing venture. This is a series that comes out at the same time every year. So I had waited a bit and revised the book a few times on my own before I ever sent my official submission. Yeah, I think I sent my submission it was April or May, and it was June or July when I heard back. I think it was probably 2 months. Heard back initially, but then we got into, the next wave, which was a whole process of revising and rewriting and tweaking certain parts of the book, and I ended up rewriting quite a bit of it after that too. I probably rewrote 30 to 40% of the book.
Now that's another a big point of contention for a lot of amateur authors that are trying to transition into professionals is taking that criticism. How did that criticism sit with you? Have you dealt with a lot of editorial criticism before, or was this sort of your first encounter with it?
Probably my first to that extent. I had gotten some notes on stories before and some requests for rewrites or revisions, things like that. And I should say that Spike didn't specifically request that I rewrite a third to a half of the book or anything like that. She gave me some notes, and it was all very constructive criticism. And ultimately, it was the right choice. I mean, it made it a better book, and that's the job of an editor. And hopefully, if you're working with an editor, you have a good one who is able to look at the work and figure out what's good about it, what could be better, and that's one part of being a writer too. I mean, of course you want to stick to your guns and you want to stick with whatever your creative output is. But at the same time, if you're working with somebody and you trust them and they have suggestions, you need to develop a thick skin first of all, and that ties into the rejections as you're speaking of, and you've got to do your best to look at the product in an objective light, and try to see if maybe these suggestions make sense. And I tried to do that. I took a step back and thought, okay, well, yeah, that's not what I would have done in the first place, but let me give it a shot. I rewrote some things. It ended up being a much better book as a result. So I'm very happy with how it went, the whole process, and how the end product turned out.
I can't help but notice, from at least my short time I spent with you at BizarroCon, you have all your limbs.
I do.
Where did the concept come from? The phantom limb concept come from?
Just something. Phantom limb syndrome is a real thing, and it's something I've just been fascinated with for a long time. There are people in the world who have lost limbs, or in some cases were born without fully developed limbs, and they experience these sensations of as if they actually had these limbs. So if somebody has a horrible accident, they lose an arm, it doesn't happen to everybody who goes through something like this, but some of them have phantom limb syndrome, and they actually still feel the sensation as if the arm is still there, and they feel like it's still there. They may feel pain, they may feel tingling sensations, itchiness, things like that, or just outright pain. And I just think it's a very interesting concept. It's I can't imagine how horrible that would be to deal with, but just kind of a fascinating concept that just shows how strange and interesting our bodies and our minds are.
One of my favorite lines in the book is near the end, when the super ghost is at its full destructive potential. One of the ways you describe it is saying, without its mind, it was just a jumble of the anxiety that the people that deal with phantom limb syndrome go through, the tingling. It was just a giant ball of tingling anxiety that these limbs possess. And for me, as many different ways as you describe this thing, and as many different ways as you describe phantom limb syndrome in the book, that to me was one of the coolest descriptions of this giant monster. Now, Fans of Kevin Strange will know Scott Cole and will note that one of my favorite go-to concepts to do in a book is to make a giant thing out of a bunch of other things. You managed to do exactly what I would have done. You said earlier in the interview that a lot of times when you're reading something, you maybe would have done something differently than the author as you're sort of going through the book, almost as if kind of looking at it from the perspective of a writer. What you would have done, God damn it, Scott Cole, I would have made giant things made out of other things to fight each other. Where do you think that concept came from for you? Is that a theme that you visit a lot? Do you like to put things on top of other things and make them fight each other in your short fiction, or is it the first time you've ever explored this wonderful, glorious fictional trope of making big things out of little things?
Let me see. Yeah, I think this is probably my first. Oh boy. Yeah, as far as I can think off the top of my head, probably the first thing that I wrote like that.
I've probably done it 1,000 times, Scott Cole. I love it. As I was reading through Super Ghost, these are the things that sort of jumped out at me. I felt like the character interaction and the kind of silliness that you put into the character development of the book reminded me of the way Joss Whedon wrote the characters on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So it's got kind of the character feel of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode. It also, obviously, once it gets to the point with giant things made out of other things fighting each other, I got a very Power Rangers-esque feel of it. And Power Rangers is my favorite show of all time and a huge inspiration for my work. So that is you might think that it's a stupid kids show, but for me, from me that's a huge compliment to tell you that I got a Power Rangers feel from it. And then I also got I could not stop picturing the mad scientist as the mad scientist from The Nightmare Before Christmas. So a lot of the book I read as a claymation cartoon.
Nice. Yeah, I'd love to see this animated in some way. I think it would work really well that way.
The other feel I kind of got from it, especially once we get to the reveal later on in the book with the other phantom limb sufferers, is I got a very strong sense of. Did you ever see MTV's Oddities? There was the Max and another show called The Head.
Yeah.
The Head.
Not in a long time, but I do remember seeing that.
The Head is a very crudely animated short cartoon episodic series about a guy, an alien crash lands into a guy's head and nests there and sort of makes this head gigantic, and he has a gigantic alien head, and he meets a bunch of other freaks. There's like a guy with a lawnmower blade stuck in the side of his head, and he's a conspiracy theorist that believes that the manufacturers of lawnmowers are in. There's a conspiracy that they're all out to get everybody. But anyway, there's a bunch of freaks that all hang out together and form a gang to fight the bad guys. And I felt like the gang that you put together, while also having like a Buffy feel to it, also had sort of a MTV's The Head feel to it also. So very, very cool stuff, and a very, very nice, very light B-movie feel to the whole thing. And I wondered what some of your other inspirations were for the book. What did you draw from for inspiration to build this?
Yeah. I would say, some of the key things were a lot of mad scientist movies. Of course, Frankenstein. That was a big part of it. Giant monster movies. All of the crazy stuff that comes from Japan, Godzilla and Mothra and all those. And I would say, in terms of some of the quirky humor, Monty Python I always name as being a big influence. And I would also say films of David Cronenberg and just kind of body horror. Always been a big fan of that. So I think all those sorts of things just kind of came together and jumbled themselves up in my head somewhere, and Super Ghost is what came out.
For me, there's nothing like it, man. When all those elements come together,
Yeah.
when your book just becomes, you said this is the first time that you've ever done this, where you realize, like, oh my god, I can put all these elements together and I can
Yep.
write a novella out of this. It's not going to be a short story. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We've been talking the whole show about how awesome short stories are. But for me, as much as I love short fiction, I love being able to get in and out of these things. That accomplishment that you feel when you build an entire book is akin to building a house. All of
Yeah.
these small parts all go together, and you slowly build them. You can't, you can look at your diagram all day long, and that's fine, or your outline in the case of a book. I'm not sure how much outlining you did other than giving yourself notes, but when you get to the end of that, and there it is, it's a whole, all of these concepts and all these characters and the fucking shit that you run them through, and it all comes together in this explosive climax, and then it's resolved. That, and when you sit back, there's nothing like it. To me, that's the absolute best feeling in life, is
Yeah.
to create these elaborate stories, the full length stories. There's nothing like it. Tell me how you felt
Yeah.
when you finally finished it and it was the final draft, and you clicked send, and it went off to the publisher. How did that make you feel, that you had
Yeah.
accomplished this?
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, I agree. It was an absolutely incredible feeling, when it came together in my head, first of all, but then when I sat down and did the work and wrote through it. And to answer your other question, yes, I did outline the book, just kind of the general idea of what was going to happen from one chapter to the next. I felt like the first time through on this, I needed that sense of structure to as a little bit of a roadmap, but there were certainly surprises along the way. Things that happened in the book that I was not expecting that really paid off. And yeah, the process was a lot of fun. It was great feeling all through it, and yeah, once I finished it, and yeah, it was amazing.
I call that riding the dragon, when your ideas get ahead of you, and
Hmm.
your characters start to make decisions that you didn't know they were going to make, and it makes sense, and
Yeah.
it's like a quantum timeline where you're on this straight path, you're on this line, and then your character suddenly makes a decision that brings you completely away from your timeline, eradicates this one, and builds its own, and it all works, and then all these possibilities extend themselves, and you choose one, and you walk down, your characters walk down this path, and it leads to something similar, possibly, to what you had at the end here, on your original timeline, but they take these glorious sort of paths around the expected, into the territory of the unexpected, and maybe they'll come back, or maybe they've built themselves, maybe your character has completely denied you the ending you expected, and they've developed their own ending to their story. They've chosen their own fate, so to speak. That's just a fucking trippy feeling, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
Did your
I
ending
plan to
end
do
up?
it again.
Did your ending turn out the way you originally planned it, or did the characters develop a new one for you?
Uh, it was, yeah, I would say it was roughly. Nah, there were some tweaks to it. I had a general idea of where it was going, but yeah, it changed, and then I revised some things later, and I guess it changed a
Typically,
little bit more. So
typically as the masters of our character's fate, a lot of time travel movies and stories have the lesson that you can't change fate. A lot of
mhm.
times, our poor characters, no matter how hard they struggle, we bring them right back to where we want them.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely do they get to break away from that timeline, or cut the strings of fate, as it were, and develop their own ending. Now, I've had a few characters, man, that from the outline, from the get set, I knew they were going to die. I knew they were going to die horribly. And when it got to that point, they refused to die, and they became key players in the rest of the story and survived. And those are the characters that impressed the shit out of me. This sounds like crazy talk for anybody that's not a writer, but but as a writer, you know what I'm saying. That as you're writing, the characters will choose their own path and change your perception of where the story should go, because they're just sort of I guess the way to explain it is they're just sort of black and white. They're sort of a two-dimensional like paper cutout, and as you develop them and as you put them through scenes and you describe their emotions, a lot of times that paper cutout idea of where they were going to end up doesn't make sense anymore to the character as you've built it, as you're going, and you give them three dimensions, and you give them feelings and memories and emotions, and you give them goals, and you give them strengths and weaknesses. A lot of times that original idea you had for them just doesn't make any sense anymore. And if you tried to force them down that path, it would just the character would be ruined.
Yep.
Scott Cole.
That's me.
You have attended one more BizarroCon than I have.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
tell me about that first encounter with BizarroCon. Did you know anybody going, or were you just cold turkey? I'm going to go out to this thing.
Mostly it was a cold turkey thing. I had considered going the year before. I didn't. I've been talking online with Gabino Iglesias, and he had gone the year before, and I hit him up one time on Twitter and asked him how his experience was, and he said nothing but great things, and so that made me think a little bit more about going the next year, which was this was at the end of 2012. So the first one I attended was 2013. There were a couple people I had chatted with a little bit online, like Gabino, but not too many. And I was just going to go. And then Adam, my friend Adam Caesar, had moved to Philly by that point. And I told him I was thinking of going and basically convinced him to come along too. So, yeah, we traveled out there together, and he knew a number of people. He knew Shane McKenzie, who was there, and a number of other people who were out there. Yeah, we traveled out together. He introduced me to some people that he knew, and that was very helpful. But it's definitely somewhere you could go without knowing anybody, and you'll make friends very quickly. And you walk in that first night, and everybody just gathers in the ad house and has drinks in their hands and smiles on their faces, and people introduce themselves to you, and it's a very welcoming, friendly atmosphere, and it was a really great experience.
What are your takeaways from that first year you attended? What do you think when you went home? What had changed about Scott Cole after attending his first BizarroCon?
I was fired up and ready to dive right back into writing, and as I mentioned, I had done my very first draft of Super Ghost at that point, and I was anxious to get back to it and do another round of revising. And I also had a ton of short story ideas that I wanted to get back into as well. That first year, as I said, I met tons of people, writers whose work I really admired. And other writers whose work I didn't know but was now very interested in looking into. There were a number of panel discussions that were really interesting, that helped kind of fuel that fire. I took 2 workshops that first year.
I was going to ask you. Yeah, I was going to ask you which ones you took, if any.
Yeah, the first year the first year I took 2 workshops. Both in the same day. That was an intense day. The first one in the morning was with John Skip, and we had to write a piece of. I think they limited it to being flash fiction, but we had to write a short story and submit it before we all traveled out, and everybody in the workshop got to read everyone else's stories and kind of make their own notes about them. And Skip, of course, had his own notes and suggestions, and it was like a 3-hour, fairly intense meeting with everybody, going through everyone else's stories, and it was amazing. And then in the afternoon, I took another workshop, which was an extreme horror workshop with Shane McKenzie and Robert Devereaux, and that was just all about gore and guts and blood and ooze and disgustingness, and that was a lot of fun too.
Sorry, I missed that. They didn't offer that
Yeah, yeah,
this year.
yeah. It was a fun one.
Those
But
workshops, I took John's workshop the following year.
yeah,
That motherfucker is just a ball of inspiration and creativity, man. I wish I could
yeah,
bottle up just a bit of it so I could sip it every once in a while when I'm feeling down. John Skip is
yep,
like the god damn. He's just everything all of us hopes and wishes we could be creatively. Like that guy is just fucking on it, man. Um,
yeah. He's great.
that workshop left me super fired up. And do you remember some of the panels that you sat in on that
The
first year?
first year,
Yeah.
let me see. There was well, actually, the one that I really remember was actually about pitching your novel or novella. So, I was I had kind of done my soft elevator pitch to Spike earlier, and I believe she moderated that panel, which was, I think, on the last day of the con, and so it was really one of the last things that I attended, and definitely made an impression. I was taking a lot of notes. So that was good, and yeah, it was just any panel discussion that happens at BizarroCon is great. Just to sit and learn from these people who are a bit more established than you, and just take whatever you can from it. Just to hear them talk about their own experiences and feedback and any tips they can offer. I just take all of that and absorb every bit of it.
Well, my impression when I got there, and I flew by myself, I knew a ton of people. I'd only met maybe who had I ever met before? Erica Instead from Rooster Republic, and who now owns Strange House. I had met her at conventions before.
Mhm.
I want to say that's the only human being I had ever actually met, and I flew out there by myself. So it was no. I had met Michael Allen Rose and his girlfriend, and I had met so I had met a couple of people in Chicago once, and then
Okay.
went out there. And when I got off the plane, this is for 2014. This is the following year, your second year.
Yep.
I hooked up with MP Johnson and Bradley Sands, and we all rented a car and drove out to show. And when I walked in the doors to register and get my room all settled and everything, it, immediately the sense that I got, and this sense traveled through the whole show and stayed with me when I came home, was that the building itself, the main building where the rooms are that you stay in,
Yep.
felt like a middle school. It felt like the wide stairs and the piping uh, 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 that sort of was your handle to walk up the stairs with. It all reminded me of the schools that I went to, my high school and my junior high, and having such intense discussions in those panels and workshops, all about writing and writing weird fiction at that. It felt like the coolest weekend of school I never got to go to when I was in school. Like it felt very much because you had a schedule, and this was all structured. You had to be in a certain place at a certain time to make sure you hit this panel or that reading or this workshop. And I just really felt, I was like, man, I wish this is what, like, I guess if I would have went to like a private art school as a kid, that's what all of school would have felt like.
Right.
Going to public school, it was a clusterfuck of hormones and bullying, but which is, it is what it is. But I just left
Yeah.
feeling like, man, I have got to go back to this every year. This is
Yeah.
such an inspiration and such a just the firing up. Are people calling you right now? You get phone
No,
calls?
I just got a message. It's good.
Yeah. Is it
I'm good.
naked pictures?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh well. Uh, I forget where I was going to go with that. I was going to talk
Well,
about when I first met Scott Cole. I had a Rooster Republic was given an hour long reading panel or reading time over in the ad house, and we had just finished up, and the new Bizarro authors were up right after us. So I don't remember, Scott, had I talked to you previously in the weekend before that, or?
I not to any great extent. I think we had met and said hello and maybe been on opposite ends of larger conversations, something like that. But yeah, nothing in detail at that point.
Yeah, I watched you perform your invocation of a super ghost as a mad scientist, and the invocation was a failure. You did not seem to be able to invoke a ghost, or perhaps it was just underwhelming because ghosts are invisible. But at that moment, I really your performance was fun. It was funny. You brought props. You dressed like a mad scientist. It was very much like I've noticed that all the readers from Eraserhead and the new Bizarro guys, you guys take it to another level with the readings, and it's something of an inspiration. That when I go this year, I'm definitely gonna have to take it up a notch and try to match the energy that you guys bring to your readings.
Nice.
Where did you come up with your idea for that reading?
Well, I had only done a couple readings prior to that in public, and they were all pretty straightforward readings. But as we've talked about, I had been to BizarroCon the year before, and I had attended the new Bizarro Author Series reading that year. The year this year there are only 3 authors in the series. The year before there were actually 7, so it was a big reading block, and everybody kind of needed to stand out a bit. So everybody did their own thing, and none of the readings that I recall were straightforward readings. There were one person did a game where they handed things out to the audience, and the audience had to draw something on a piece of paper. I remember Daniel Vlacity, whose book The Church of TV as God, he did his reading with a prop that basically turned his head into a 3-dimensional television, things like that. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wasn't sure what. It was kind of up in the air until right before BizarroCon what I was going to do, and I had this idea to get a lab coat and goggles and pretend for a few minutes that I was Dr. Rains from Super Ghost doing the big reveal of the Super Ghost, and it didn't quite work out, and I revealed that I was not actually the mad scientist. I was in fact the author of Super Ghost, and I felt bad about the deception, so I decided to hand out prizes, but in order to win prizes, I asked people to do shots of ghost pepper hot sauce, which is pretty spicy.
And who was I forget who's the one that actually grabbed one and just went right for it?
Yeah, well, 3 people did it ultimately. I think who jumped up first? It might have been. I know it was Garrett Cook and Nathan Carson and Peter Dale. He might be the one you're thinking of.
Yeah.
They all took part, and they all did it, and some of them enjoyed it, and some of them didn't. I'll say that. They all won prizes.
I have a friend that actually grows ghost peppers down here where I live. He's got a little greenhouse, and he's a professional ghost pepper salesman.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's hot stuff. I definitely tested it before I subjected other people to it.
I don't fuck with the stuff, man. I don't like it, and every once in a while, my friends will cut it up and put it on pizza, and I eat it, and I hate myself for it afterwards because there's no pleasure. There is no pleasure in that. It just hurts, and then when you think it's not going to hurt anymore, it hurts worse. Ghost pepper starts off sort of maybe with the intensity of a jalapeno or a habanero, and then it only gets worse.
Yeah.
It starts off at an acceptable level, the level that you're used to, and then over the course of about 3 minutes, it gets to the point where it's nearly ungoddamn bearable, and then it will finally back off. But once it backs off, your fucking taste buds feel like they've been molested. It's just
Yeah.
not a fucking fun experience.
Yeah.
I do it to
You
myself
can,
every time, though.
yeah, and you can smell it. I mean, as soon as the container is open,
Yeah.
oh man, I don't know. The year before, actually, the first year that I went to BizarroCon, Ross Lockhart did a thing where, and he did it again this year, where he brought some beer pairings to go with certain Bizarro books. Well, this first year, one of the beers that he brought was a ghost pepper beer, and I tasted it, and man, just a sip of the beer that had been brewed with it was too much. It hit you before you got the thing to your mouth. I mean, the smell. I said, like, it smells like Cheez-Its or something. Like, and when something spicy smells like Cheez-Its, you know it's not gonna taste like that.
Right.
It's gonna kill you. So it's pretty serious stuff. So yeah, I thought the next year I would subject somebody else to something similar and give some prizes away. Actually, I have one of the prizes I gave away. I'll just show. You may have seen this.
Yes.
I
Yes.
made
Yes.
this is my little promo piece. There are only 25 of these in existence, and if you can see, it's actually phantom limb candy.
Yes. That's
Um,
fantastic.
and so that was one of the prizes that people won for doing shots of ghost pepper hot sauce. These
And
are
that's
super limited edition, and I'll be doing more giveaways with these over the course of the year. But that's
that's
fun.
just that's the fantastic part about BizarroCon is times that by 100, and everybody has these wonderful performance art ideas. They're all gifted authors and artists and musicians, and everybody's so fucking nice. And like you said, you can just run randomly into an editor and pitch a book. I got to pitch 2 books to Rose during dinner one night, just because she asked me, "What are you working on?"
Nice.
Oh fuck, here we go. I've got half a fucking breadstick in my mouth. Like, oh, let me tell you all about it. All organic, doesn't feel forced. I was not sitting there going, well, I'm hanging out with Rose O'Keefe. I get to pitch books. I had no intention of even bringing it up until it was presented to me, and it's such a great group of people, so creative, and it's
Yeah.
it's just like this unlimited amount of creative energy that you can tap into and take as much of it home as you want to, and add as much as you want to it. Let's talk about the Bizarro Showdown after the Wonderland Awards that happens every Saturday at
Yeah.
BizarroCon. That was a God damn. That's so much. Those performance art pieces. How long does that go on? It's like a
Oh, hours.
3 hour venture where people go up and they have 6 minutes to do a performance art piece, and the level of just the vast the differences between everyone's performances and the different creative things that people bring to the table for these performance art pieces is just, oh, it's so fucking cool.
Yeah.
I've never been anywhere or experienced anything like the level of weird creativity, because everybody's been to a fucking talent show, but nobody's been to a talent show where the goal is to be as fucked up as you can be.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, and yeah, the whole BizarroCon experience. It's called, it's referred to as a convention, and it is, but it's really more of a I don't know. I think it's more like a conference, more of a workshop, trade show. It's not the sort of thing that you necessarily go to. Like some other conventions I've been to where there's a big dealer room. Yes, you can buy books there from different publishers, but that's not really the goal. It's really more about the scene, the community, meeting people, talking about your various creative projects, and learning. I described after I went the first year, I described it to people when I came back as being like, well, half of it was a party, and the other half of it was like you said, it was like school. It was an education in a lot of different ways, and it was all great. Both aspects were really wonderful.
And
Um,
they fed into each other because the just
yeah,
while you're like I met so many wonderful people that I still stay in contact with. You know, it's only been a few months, but that I made really good friends with, like Gabino Iglesias. While I was there, I got to hang out with him a lot. Got to drink a lot of beer with him. Got to talk to him, and the conversations that you have during the parties and stuff. It's not just people getting fucked up. It's loosening up and talking about everything that you've learned.
yep.
And it's fucking great. And I encourage anybody that's into writing weird shit. There's like there's this kind of an attitude, like in a small portion of this community, that thinks that like that's some like money grab. That like, well, of course they want you to go to BizarroCon so they can make. Nobody's making money there. It's so
No,
fucking cheap. It's so fucking cheap to go do. You're spending more money. The airline fucking companies are making more money
yeah,
than anybody at
it's true.
BizarroCon. And people with kids or people with tight schedules or people that don't have money, they want to act resentful about. Well, oh, I heard you got to go to BizarroCon to get published by Eraserhead Press. It's not. That's just. It's not that.
No,
It's just you become friends with these people. You suddenly, like you said, you're just walking down the fucking hallway and you run into the fucking editor of the new Bizarro Author Series program and you get to pitch a book.
yeah,
Or you can send an email that gets buried under 200 other emails and nobody knows who the fuck you are. And then people want to act like, well, it should be based on my merits as an author, not who I know. It is based on your merits as an
of
author.
course.
But when you run into somebody and leave an impression with them and they see your email in 200 emails, they're going to say, oh, I remember that guy. I'll take a look at this real quick. If it sucks, it's not going to matter. It doesn't
Of course.
matter. You get,
Yeah.
people act like that nobody's getting rejected at that level. Everybody's getting rejected at that level. Not everybody makes it the first time or the second time or the third time. I know our friend Gabino has had his pitches, rejected over 10 times, and everybody loves him. Everybody knows him, and he's not. It's
Yeah.
not that he's pitching bad books. It's that they're looking for a specific type of book. They want
Yeah.
a specific type of book, and you just have to keep pitching until you get it right. But it's not that you're getting preferential treatment because you become someone's friend. You become someone's friend organically, but you still have to put the work in. And so that's why I encourage people, just number one, if you're gonna write weird shit, go to BizarroCon and meet everybody.
Yeah.
And there's only a fraction of the people that are there that even work for the main publisher. Everybody else are fellow authors, just like you. And like I said, we create this just giant cloud of creativity that you can just draw from and hear war
Yeah.
stories. Like I know so many people that they don't have the first clue how to even contact these publishers to even get published in the first place. You're talking about, you're familiar with the new Bizarro Author program and stuff. A lot of people aren't, and they don't know the first clue about how to get involved in it. Go to BizarroCon and 100 people can tell you how. And everybody wants to. There's no trade secrets. Everybody there is, if you have questions, you will have answers. If you want to be published and you go in with an open mind, you're going to leave with the first building blocks put together for that process. You're going to have already shaken hands and made plans to submit fiction. If you're an author and you go to BizarroCon with the intent of being published and you don't walk out of there with at least a handshake from a publisher, I would be shocked. You'd be doing something
Yeah.
really wrong. You'd be spending the whole weekend in your room not talking to anybody. That's how easy it is. It's just
Yeah.
it's a great experience, and everybody should go up there. And it's going to cost you a little money. Save now. The dates are
Yeah.
up. The dates are up. It's isn't it the first weekend in November this year?
I believe so. That sounds right.
Yeah, it's the weekend right after Halloween, so take your kids trick-or-treating, get them everything they need, pack them off to Grandma's house, and my buddy Adam Millard from the UK is going to he's going to travel 24 hours on a plane
Yeah.
to come to
Yeah.
fucking BizarroCon this year. You don't have an excuse. Send the kids to Grandma's house. Hey, my friend, what's his name? God damn it. Clown Tier Junkies.
Oh, Douglas Hackle.
Doug Hackle, he brought his family.
Yeah, yeah.
If you can't get grandma to watch the kids, bring grandma with you. If you don't like flying, do what Danger Slater did, and he took a train for 5 days.
That's right.
There's
Yeah.
nothing stopping you from going to BizarroCon. You gotta go. It's the best event I've ever attended as a writer. And I've been a part of panels at other shows, and I've done readings at other shows, and nothing is like BizarroCon. It's fucking
Yeah.
awesome. So
It's definitely its own thing, and yeah, great experience. Everybody, as we said, very friendly, very approachable, and just an all-around great experience. Yep.
that's 2 hours.
Wow, it sure is.
What's in the future for Scott Cole? You've put out this wonderful book, Super Ghost. People know your name. You've been published in the Bizarro community, the horror community. You've got space zombie stories floating out there that I'm going to try to track down. I hope that anthology isn't out of print because I want to pick up this space zombie anthology. What's next for Scott Cole?
Oh, more writing. I've got a couple other novella or novel ideas I'm starting to work on, and yeah, hopefully people will pick up Super Ghost, and that'll hopefully enable me to get some of these other stories out into the world. Yeah, right now, let's see. Well, actually, this week, if anybody out there watching is on Goodreads, there's a Bizarro fiction group on Goodreads, and all this month is NBAS month. So they're reading all 3 of the new Bizarro Author Series books for this year over the course of February. Last week, people read Tom Lucas's Pax Titanus. This week it's Super Ghost, and next week it's Deep Blue by Brian Auspis. And there's discussion threads, and there's going to be some giveaways and some AMAs with the authors and things like that. So that's really the most immediate thing. And like I said, hopefully people pick up the book, and yeah, I've got some other projects in the pipeline, and they will hopefully see the light of day in the near future.
Everybody visit 13visions.com to follow all things Scott Cole. Check out his art there. Check out his stories there. His future works, I'm sure, will be featured on the site. Goodreads.com. Search for the Bizarro Fiction Group and join that group. Teresa Pollock has gone out of her way and busted her ass to bring us completely up to date on all things Bizarro fiction. Every month she's doing giveaways, sending people books from money out of her own pocket in the mail to make sure that everyone is reading Bizarro. She's highlighting some of the best writers this month. As Scott has said, it's new Bizarro Author Series, class of 2015. Last month we did a few of my books, and as an author, let me tell you, the feedback I got and the participation that there was in my threads was, I can't thank Teresa enough for putting that stuff together. It was invaluable. I had more discussion about a couple of my books that maybe hadn't gotten a lot of attention than I've ever gotten, and as an author, it feels damn good to have readers send you questions and ask you about things and be excited about the things you hope they'd be excited about and be moved by the things you'd hope they'd be moved for. Writing ain't stand-up comedy, folks. You don't get to tell a joke and hear the audience laugh a second later. It's a slow burn, and the feedback a lot of times is few and far between, and we as writers spend a lot of time on the brink of the void, just sort of staring off into the maw of non-existence, and we like to hear back from you, and Teresa is giving us that opportunity as authors to hear from you, the readers. Please participate in these programs. Please find the Bizarro Fiction group on Goodreads and hang out and give Teresa some help if you've got some time on your hands. She would love to have some more moderators in those groups. Help her out to sending out these emails and moderating these discussion threads, and really give her a hand, folks. If you've got the time, she's got the work for sure, and help get Bizarro fiction to that next level. We talked about Adam Caesar and Carlton Mellick having books published through Random House this year. 2015 is a huge year for Bizarro fiction, and as a reader, you can personally help to get Bizarro and all the Bizarro authors to the next level. It's happening right now. It's a revolution in fiction, and your participation could be you could be the hand that helps topple Bizarro over the edge into a more mainstream audience's lap. So these readers get exponentially more. The writers get an exponentially larger amount of readers, and we need your help. So head over to Goodreads and do that shit, right, Scott?
Amen.
Anything else?
You said it. No, I think that covers it.
We dig deep enough? Yeah. Did we get to where you wanted us to get to?
Did you get where you wanted to get to? That's the big question.
Well, let me tell you, Scott Cole is one of the nicest guys I met at BizarroCon. I got to spend a little time with him during the show, and then afterwards, we like I said, we caught a taxi together, and we had a great conversation in the taxi, and once we got to the airport, and I'm so glad I got to have him on the show. I consider him a friend, one of the best guys I met at the show. Can't wait to hang out with him this year, and I hope we stay in contact, Scott, and be buddies, before the show. I like you. You're a good dude.
Absolutely. You too, man. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I had a good time.
All right, man. Well, we'll. Right. I don't know who's going to be next on the show. I don't have anybody lined up yet. I got a couple ideas. I don't want to say who they are in case things don't work out, but we will be doing another show in the next couple of weeks. This is Kevin Strange for Strange the World. Strange the World. Scott Cole. Strange the World.
Strange the World.
I like to get at least one Strange the World out of the guest before we go. We'll see you next time, gang. Thank you, Scott Cole, so much. Everybody read Super Ghost. Pick up Super Ghost on Amazon. Go to 13visions.com and see what Scott Cole has to offer. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.